Some nudibranchs, especially in the tropics, are very brightly colored, and the thought is that it's a warning coloration. Fish associate the bright colors with a nasty taste, and they will avoid nudibranchs. But if that doesn't work, they do have the stinging cells to help out. And this here, it's hard to tell. It's part of what its defense is. This is a red dendronitis. It matches well with the sort of red kelp that it's on. It's hard to see, and that's another way that nudibranchs protect themselves, is by blending in with their food mainly. This is an example of, these are pink mouth hydroids. This is a little anemone. This is a pink mouth hydroid. This is a nudibranch. It looks very similar to the anemone, and it's very hard to spot underwater because it's small and it looks a lot like the food it eats and the other animals in the area. I have a closer picture. This is what the nudibranch looks like. Again, it curves its serrata so that it looks like an anemone. They're very, very hard to spot because they look so much like both the food they eat and the surroundings that they spend their lives in. This is it's called a hedgehog hydroid. It's a colony of sort of pinkish hydroids. You can see the little tentacles and mouths there. These are pink Chthona. There are several of them in here. They're very hard to see when they're in their prey because their serrata looks so much like the hydroids that they feed on. But sometimes you will see them out in the open, and they're a lot easier to spot when they're not in their normal prey. But it looks like this one is about to eat this hydroid, even though it's not its typical food, but they will eat other hydroids. This is a giant nudibranch, the one that we saw swimming. It also can get around by crawling on the ground, and it looks a lot like what it eats. It eats this tube-dwelling anemone, and you can see it has the maroon sort of spotting and the white tips, and it looks a lot like what it eats, which makes them hard to spot for a diver, and I imagine hard for fish as well. There's a close-up of the giant nudibranch. Again, this is red sponge, and these are red sponge nudibranchs. They're really hard to spot on the red sponge. They're a lot easier to spot when they're not on a red sponge. And that's, knowing what to look for makes it easier to spot them when they're on the red sponge. Talk a little bit now about the dorid defenses. So scientists have been studying dorids and these types of nudibranchs because they can do something with the chemicals. They don't just take them in and store them as is. This one here can change the chemical that they take in from the sponge into something even more toxic than what the sponge had, which is a pretty amazing thing for a slug to be able to do. And then these actually have toxins in them that aren't even present in the sponges. So they are manufacturing completely different toxins based on what they've taken in from the sponges. So scientists is very interesting because, the possible, cancer-fighting compounds, they are so toxic. They're way too toxic at this point to be used as medicine, but by continuing to look at them, and especially at how these animals can create such toxic compounds, maybe they can be used for human medicine. This is the other body shape, the other type of nudibranch, the aeolid that stores the nematocysts from the stinging animals that it eats up in these tips of its serrata. And then the question is, well, my goodness, how do they do that? How do they eat these things that are meant to sting them? And so scientists have discovered that they have several different ways of protecting themselves from being stung. One is that the inside, it's called the buccal cavity, it's their mouth, and then their esophagus or throat has a hard covering to it, so it's not soft like ours. It's hard, and so the stinging cells, if they do fire, they don't hurt the nudibranch because of the hard surface of its interior. And again, their stomach cells, the lining of their stomach, has spindles that will form a physical barrier to keep the stinging cells from stinging the inside of the stomach and actually down into the digestive area. The spindles are found in other parts of the body as well, and they keep the stinging cells from stinging the insides of the nudibranch. And also, they are finding that nudibranchs generate a mucus that will keep the nematocysts from firing. They've taken slides and they've smeared the slides with the nudibranch mucus, and they've put those up to anemones, and they found that there are not nearly as many fired nematocysts on the nudibranch mucus as on the plain slide. So there is some inhibition of nematocyst firing just from the nudibranch mucus. So, is there anything that eats a nudibranch? It seems that crabs, it's hard for me to say for sure. In this picture, it looks like this is a little decorator crab, and it looks like there's little bits missing here from this egg ribbon. But I've not actually seen it. I've not seen the crab take the eggs and actually eat the eggs, so I can't say for sure. I can just say that I've read that crabs are considered to be a predator of nudibranchs. I haven't seen it myself. Sea stars are predators of nudibranchs. I'll show you in a minute what nudibranchs do to get away from sea stars. And then this is a fish that lives in this area. It's called a mosshead warbonnet. And it has been seen taking a nudibranch and folding it in half so those serrata will fire on themselves and not on the fish, and it will eat the nudibranch that way. And this is a picture that a diver friend of mine said, "Oh, I've seen a fish eat a nudibranch." He had this picture. I wasn't there. I don't know whether the fish really did eat the nudibranch or spit it back out afterwards or had terrible indigestion. I don't know, but he did try. The fish at least has the nudibranch. This is a clown dort. He's got him in there, at least at this point. I'm not sure if he actually ate him, but it does show that fish will at least try to eat them. And this is the video showing the Tritonia. This is its escape maneuver when it comes in contact with a sea star, which has been known to prey on the pink Tritonia. And they can't see, so it has no idea at this point where the sea star is and where it is probably, so it just keeps moving as far as it can to get away from its predator. And then it settles, and this in front here is a sea pen, and that's what the nudibranch will eat if it's not bothered by the sea star. And this is an example where it looks like a fish, maybe a crab, something has taken a bite out of this one or tried to take a bite, and so this nudibranch has let go. It can do that. It can jettison its entire serrata, just let them go. It's like, well, like a lizard in its tail. It's better to let the serrata go and keep on crawling, because they can grow them back, and they'll grow them back in just a few days. So no harm done to the nudibranch, and the fish probably has learned a lesson as well. So you don't have to dive to find nudibranchs. You can see them in tide pools. So these are just a few examples. I don't have a lot of examples of I spend more time diving than I do tide pooling, but there is a researcher down in California I'll talk about in a minute, who used to dive quite a bit and now doesn't dive. He only does tide pooling, and every year he does a survey and finds just any number of nudibranchs in a low tide pool situation. So this is what's called a Monterey Dorad, and this was on a piling. This is the water. You can't quite tell, but this is a piling, and this is the water edge on the piling. He was just about an inch from the surface on a dock. This is in a tide pool. This is the sun reflecting on the water. This is in our front yard. The tide went out. There was a little pool left, and this is a shaggy mouse, what's called. They eat anemones. Those anemones you'll find in low tide areas. They eat those, so you'll often, if you look, you can find these nudibranchs sort of curled up once the tide has gone out, because they can't live too long outside of water, but you can find them in tide pools. And then this is a very odd picture. This is me with my camera taking a picture of this giant nudibranch on the edge of a dock. Again, it was just crawling practically on the surface of the dock. So docks are a really good place to look for nudibranchs because they can be crawling really close to the surface there. And it's still possible to find new ones. These are examples of nudibranchs that we've seen in our front yard that are different from the normal coloration of nudibranchs of their type that they study down in California. So I'm working with one of the researchers down there to collect the specimens here to make sure that these are in fact the same species that they're seeing down in California, or maybe they are slightly different. Is it just a coloration? But they don't see these colors down in California, but you can't tell by colors. They do DNA analysis to make sure that these are the same as the ones that they see down in California, even though the colors are completely different. This is the example. This is Jeff Goddard, who has been studying nudibranchs for at least 40 years down in California. And this was October 2010, so, well, a year ago now, but he discovered this species that was previously unknown. And he's been looking for them for 40 years, or looking at them for 40 years. And he found a new one just last year in California. So there are still ones out there that haven't been discovered. That's another thing that makes it really exciting to do, is to think that you could find something that no one's found before. And this is another researcher in California who goes on expeditions. He's been going to the same area in the Philippines for the past, it looks like 20 years. And the expedition they just got back from in June, they found 50 new species. So, and this is someone who's been going for 20 years, and every year they're still finding new species. And that's in an area where they already know 800 species. So it's there's still a lot to learn about nudibranchs and a lot of nudibranchs to find, it seems. So that's the story of nudibranchs and what they look like and where they live around here, or what they eat around here. And I want to thank everyone for coming, and want to know if anyone has any questions. Thank you.